It's a brand new week on the Shaun Starr Show. There he is, smiling ear to ear. It's Marco D'Amico from rg.org. All things Montreal Canadiens. When we last spoke, the Montreal Canadiens very much in the mix. And guess what? We're speaking here today. And Marco, they're still very much in the mix. 4 games from last Sunday in the overtime win over the Rangers up until the 4-3 overtime loss to the New Jersey Devils on a Saturday night at the Bell Center. Marco, welcome back. How do you think the Montreal Canadiens went through their 4 games with 2 wins and 2 losses this past week?
Yeah, it was a lot of up and down. I think we saw it yesterday. There's that idea that they always seem to get themselves into that hole, but as we've seen over the last, I would even go back to last year, just their ability to come back into games and never give up. I think once the Canadiens develop that consistency to start games strong, I think you're going to see a very dangerous team long term.
And so why, like, that's the habit, right? Like the Montreal Canadiens for the better
Pun
part of a
intended.
week, 2 weeks of looking at trailing, they look more comfortable having to fight back, claw back. We saw that Sunday night against the Rangers. The Blue Shirts had a lead 4 different times. Montreal walks off with a 5-4 win.
Yep.
Bookend that was Saturday's 4-3 overtime loss where the Devils had multiple 2-goal leads before Montreal clawed back. I mean, what do we read into just that trend in the last week and a half or so?
I think the Canadians have I wouldn't call it a concentration issue to start, but there definitely doesn't feel like a whole lot of urgency to begin games. Like they do a lot of that feel out process while the other team is doing all the attacking. And we think I've noticed this a lot this season, where the Canadians kind of were a little bit careful at the beginning, and then kind of picked it up. Well, lately we're seeing them not so much be careful, but almost careless in the first or second period. I think it's back-to-back games where their opponents have 40 plus shots. So it's kind of creating a situation where you're putting your goalie out to dry. And Samuel Montembeault had an exceptional performance this week, and then Dobish again last night or Saturday night. I found like they're leaning heavy on the goaltending of late, but I think what's really positive is that we're seeing a diverse amount of scoring. Not necessarily, like at the beginning of the week, people were saying what's going on with the top line. Now no one's talking about the top line because the top line did well the last 2 games, but now it's, oh, what about Patrick Laine and Kirby Dach? So the fact that the conversation keeps moving means that there's an ebb and flow in this team. And there's just, they're starting to find their rhythm against top teams. And let's be fair, it's a very difficult schedule that they've had since mid-December till now, and it's not going to get any easier. I mean, the teams that they play may get easier, with Anaheim, I believe, coming up, and so on and so forth. But then you got like double back-to-backs right before the Four Nations. So like this is a team that if they can stay in the race come the Four Nations break, their schedule at the return of the Four Nations is actually quite favorable. For once, because in the last years, it was the complete opposite. They had the hardest schedules. So it is very interesting to me. And I think it's just a question of consistency and focus. But what I think Canadians fans should hold on to, the teams that they're coming back against are not just your average teams. Like the Rangers, the 5-4 overtime win, like I understand the Rangers have had a tough time this season, but they've been very good the last 2 weeks. So that wasn't a fluke win one way or the other. The Devils have been one of the top teams in the NHL for the entire season. So again, like to go back to back and get those 2 unanswered goals to force overtime.
Sure.
To me, you see the character, and I think that's the key, right? So once they start actually adding elite talent to this core, which they did in Patrick Laine, but they'll continue to do next season, at least with Ivan Demidov, if not more. I think that's what's going to kind of help drive this into a very positive direction.
You talk about the amount of shots the Canadians have been surrendering, right? It's, as you correctly point out, it's back-to-back 40-plus shots. It was 44 Saturday with Dobish making 40 saves. They blocked 32 shots with Carrier and Hudson combining for 12 blocks in that 4-3 overtime loss to New Jersey. So I'm curious because my take on that is, and you alluded to it earlier, the schedule has been an absolute monster since they came out of the Christmas break, right? And they've done exceptionally well I think they thrived under that challenge. But for me, the reality is starting to sink in. The lack of practice time. They're playing basically every other day. And for the first time since what, January 11th, Marco, the Canadians actually have 3 days where they don't play. They played Saturday. They don't play again until Tuesday. For the last 2.5 weeks, it's been every other day they're playing
Yep.
and they're not practicing. And the power play still looks okay, but not as dangerous as it once was. So is that a legitimate reason? Is it a cop out? That I think the team collectively looks a little tired, and that's why we're seeing some disorganized play. Again, old habits of getting hemmed into their own end, and some mental mistakes. So, how much of that
Yeah.
is legitimate in your mind? The schedule, the condensed schedule, and the lack of practice time to explain why the team has looked a little tired recently.
Yeah, well, when you're a young team, concentration and
Yes.
discipline is always something that's very difficult to maintain under, harsh circumstances. I'm not going to make excuses for the team. They can obviously do better, and we've seen them do better. But when you're looking at a guy, for example, like Lane Hudson, who hasn't had the last 2 games for him have not been his best. I would say it's his worst 2 game stretch of his career. That's totally normal. He's a rookie. I think everybody expected this kind of, you know, down flow, and he'll probably come back up stronger for it. But it's unfortunately, like, when you get into January and February, this is generally speaking when young teams hit walls, and it's normal. And
Yeah.
instead, the Canadians are still keeping pace, despite, as you said, no practice time. And I think the thing that concerns me the most, as you mentioned, is the power play.
Mhm.
Since December, I believe they're hitting at like 15 or 16%, which is just simply not going to cut it. They need to be above 20% to keep up in this race.
Yeah.
The benefit is their 5-on-5 play is gone from abysmal to actually quite good. So
Elite.
there's a lot of like negatives and positives that you can take.
Yeah.
But the thing that I really I'm focusing on, and I'm really trying to get a handle on, is the 1-2 punch at center. And I think that to me is the key. The games where both Nick Suzuki and Kirby Dach are on, the
Mhm.
Canadians dominate. And no, again, no disrespect to Kirby Dach. A lot of people still aren't sold on him being the second line center of the future, but you're starting to see him get his groove back. And in the games where he does, he looks excellent. And so it's just, again, that level of concentration, consistency. But that, over the last month, he's been, very much the same kind of Kirby Dach that we saw at the tail end of the 2022 season, when he was playing lights out. And so, to me, when we watch that play on the ice with Alex Newhook, Patrick Laine, I'm not sure if the combination of those three is necessarily the most optimal. I think eventually having a guy like Ivan Demidov slide into that slot and moving Newhook down the lineup will help
Yep.
them. But in the time that we're seeing them play together, you have to be at least happy that you're seeing that progress, because
Mm.
it did not look good in November. And a big part of why they're doing so well now is because matchups, especially at home, are becoming much easier on Martin St. Louis.
The Montreal Canadiens have not lost back-to-back regulation games in almost a full month until well, they didn't lose in regulation on Saturday. So it's still the streak is still ongoing. December 12th and 14th was the last time they lost back-to-back in regulation. But it is nevertheless a 2-game winless streak for the Canadiens going into a brand new week. It starts Tuesday night at 7 against Winnipeg at home. Thursday, it's the Minnesota Wild, another 7 o'clock puck drop. And then, as Marco alluded to earlier in this conversation here, it's off for a Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m. puck drop against the Anaheim Ducks. I had one person on my live show on Sunday morning throw out this comment. Um, Maybe they should recall Caden Primo because he's been great for the Laval Rocket. I'm like, that's true, but Jakub
So
Dobeš
have the,
did not been a problem.
so have the
um,
other two.
so I liked Jakub Dobeš's battle back after that second goal, which he admitted was weak sauce Saturday against the Devils, but he was
Yeah.
so good, so strong, so confident in the remaining moments of that hockey game. I can't help but ask you the question: is Tuesday going to be the first time that he gets back-to-back starts?
No.
Walk me through how you think. Did Saturday's result change anything with Sam Montembeault not having his best game in Detroit? What's the goalie matchup look like for you this week? Again, Tuesday, Winnipeg, Thursday against Minnesota, Sunday afternoon at Anaheim. What's that look like in your mind this week?
And if I'm not mistaken, are the Canadians also playing the Monday? Like, is it a back-to-back situation with LA right after?
No, it's Anaheim
No, okay.
Sunday, San Jose Tuesday night at
Tuesday.
10:30.
There
So
it is.
Wednesday they play at LA. So Tuesday, Wednesday is the back to back.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah,
So eventually I think he's going to get 2 games within the next week. I think
right.
is my call, right? So I think that ultimately you go back to Montembeault,
Yeah.
especially when you're playing. I believe the Winnipeg Jets are second at the moment of this recording in the NHL
Yes.
in the standings. So like, I don't
I
think you
know.
mess with that. And I understand that people want to, throw the kid in because he has been playing quite well. But there is like I need fans to understand like there is adrenaline right now for these young players coming in, playing the way they have, especially when you're playing at the Bell Center.
Yeah.
The adrenaline is very, very high. And Dobish is, when I used to speak to Dobish when he was still in the NCAA, and his
Mhm.
favorite players, well, first and foremost was Carey Price. So he watched a lot of Montreal Canadiens games. So this guy comes on the ice for his first couple of games at the Bell Center, and he just wants to stop everything. He's at 150%. Eventually that's going to come back down to 100, and you just don't want to overdo it. You want to give him a little bit, at a time. And I think that's what the Canadians are doing. So I expect Montembeault to play against Winnipeg. If he plays well, I would not be surprised to see him play again against Kaprizov and the Minnesota Wild. But the one thing I will say is the Canadians haven't been shy about sending Jakub Dobiš against the best teams in the NHL. Like
Fact.
they have been
Fact.
merciless in that regard. So it would not surprise me if Dobiš played against Minnesota, but my gut says that he'll end up getting a game or two
Mm.
on the West Coast trip when they play against Anaheim, LA, and San Jose.